On November 1st, 2011, one of the strangest albums ever recorded was released. Lulu. Now, I remember Lulu. I remember going to the local record store with my brother and one of my friends. We went into the local record store, and I remember we were really excited because we were getting, Megadeth released 13, Anthrax released Worship Music, and of course, Metallica with Lou Reed released Lulu. And so, of course, I picked up 13 Worship Music, and my friend picked up Lulu. So we had, those three, and I remember going back and listening to them and all that stuff. We were really excited to go back and listen to them. It was great. It was a pretty fun and exciting day that day. I'll never forget that. But when it comes to Lulu, I remember I didn't know what we were in for until I got a good idea based on the opening lyrics to the first song, Brandenburg Gate. Honestly, if I were to recommend anything, a great synopsis of this album is the opening to Brandenburg Gate. Just the opening instrumental and the first few lines of lyrics sums up the entire album, what you're getting into. With that said, subsequently it received a lot of negativity, especially from even guys like Cover Killer Nation and The Needle Drop, for example. And it became kind of a meme, a really kind of early meme before memes were like extremely popular like they are now. So, but then the question became, it's been 6 years. Does it still hold up? Does it hold up at all? Does it bring anything new to the table? I personally haven't listened to it in a few years. I think 3 years. So, revisiting this album was something that was interesting to me. It was kind of an interesting exercise, because since listening to it, I've listened to a lot of weird, abstract things, and this is on Wikipedia's page called an avant-garde metal album. So I thought I'd go back to it, revisit this album. All 80 some odd minutes of it. I think it's 87 minutes long or something like that. It's longer than Load and Reload, which is worrisome. If you know anything about Load and Reload, those albums are too long, but I'm not here to talk about those, am I? So when it comes to Lulu, this album, a lot of people don't like it, obviously. My brother actually revisited Lulu not too long ago, and we were on a voice chat, and he was talking about it, and he basically summed up his thoughts on the album with 2 words: abrasive and boring. And that's that's a pretty moderate opinion considering other people's opinions about it. Because a lot of people just hated it, and they still do, I think, for the most part. But I remember when I reviewed Lulu 3 years ago, the review is no longer available. It was taken down because of a copyright claim. I believe I received a strike for that, so it's not online anymore. But when I did review it, I gave it a benefit of the doubt that a lot of people didn't really appreciate, I don't think. And coming back to this album, I had that in my mind. I had just come out of reviewing Lou Reed's entire discography because he had died that year in 2014. So I thought it would be only appropriate to review his discography, and Lulu was on that list. Now, Lulu itself is an album. It has, in my opinion, it only has, like, I want to say 3 songs. It has properly about 3 songs on there. It's not, it's one of those albums, I mean, yeah, it's one of those albums that's pretty much got only 3 real songs, and the other 7 tracks are more or less spoken word poetry over an instrumental backing. Sometimes the instrumental backing is more ambient, and sometimes the instrumental backing is more in your face. Now, what's interesting about this album on the production level is when it comes to the instrumentals and James Hetfield's vocals, he everything sounds perfectly fine. But then when we get to Lou Reed's vocals, they don't fit in that well. I don't know what they used to record his vocals, but it's interesting because it doesn't sound compressed like everything else does. Everything is pretty much all compressed except for Lou Reed's vocals, which is interesting. I don't know why they chose that, but that leads to a few problems when especially when the instrumentals really pick up. Sometimes Lou Reed's vocals don't come out that well. They kind of get buried under the instrumentals, which is one thing that is to consider. Also, speaking of Lou Reed's vocals, you can tell that he is an aging man at this point. He is his voice speaks to his age at that time. He's not the strapping young fellow that he was when he was recording, his first album, let's say. So that's another thing to remember, I guess you could say. It's one of those things that's like, at first it's a little grating. Well, not grating, I don't want to say. It's a little bit, it's kind of off-putting, and it sounds like the ravings of an old man in the background. But when you get to the later tracks, I think lyrically, which I'll get to the lyrics in a second, I think lyrically his voice fits in better with the last few tracks. I think the last 4. I think his vocals are better suited for that, just because the mental state of the narrator seems to be becoming tired, and they're no longer, they're kind of like raving, but raving gets a little tired, and his voice having aged the way it did seems to play in favor of those lyrics. Lyrically, this album is abstract, to say the least. This album is one of those things that's like, it's poetry, but poetry that very few could understand. I don't understand it. I always had a problem with poetry, so I don't know what this is actually about. I don't know what it's referencing. I know it's supposed to be about like a couple plays or something like that. I have no idea. But lyrically, I mean, it's all over the place. It's full of expletives. It's full of it's sometimes it's almost like incoherent rambling, which I think maybe that's what he was going for. I mean, his vocal delivery seems to be pretty calculated, I think. But yeah, the lyrics I don't understand. Even following along, because that's what I did when I listened to the album. I was following along with the lyrics, trying to figure out what it was saying, but A lot of it depends on repetition of certain phrases. There are a lot of one-liners on this album. I will say that. There are a lot of one-liners like I am the table. You can't put a honey pot in a jar, or can't put a butterfly in a jar. A monkey than a monkey. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot of weird phrases that happen in this album. It's pretty abstract, I have to say. But this album isn't for everybody. I will say that. It is an album that's really for someone who, I don't know. I don't know who it's for. I don't think Lou Reed or this album even knows who it's for. It's just kind of a weird avant-garde sort of project experiment. I don't think Lou Reed intended this to be something big or something important. It seemed to be at this point, based on his comments about receiving all the hate that this album got. He kind of, it seems like he was just treating this as sort of some kind of passion project. I mean, this isn't, if anybody has listened to Lou Reed's music, especially the albums directly preceding this. I mean, Hudson was first you have The Raven, right? The Raven, his concept album that he came out with before this. It's like his third to last album, where a lot of it is just Edgar Allan Poe poetry recited in a certain order to show a story. And in my opinion, even though it's a little abstract, it's actually pretty cool. I thought I still like it, even though it's really long. I think it's enjoyable all the way through. Despite it being so abstract. And then you have Hudson River Wind Meditations, which is just an album dedicated solely to ambient drone sounds, just like that's all it is. Only 4 tracks long. It's a really abstract album. So going into this album knowing these things, this album shouldn't be that much of a surprise, and it isn't much of a surprise to someone like me who has listened to Lou Reed's entire discography and listened to drone and ambient stuff and all that stuff. This is kind of a cakewalk for me, I will say, because I do enjoy drone and his 2 albums coming before this. So I mean, for me, this album isn't horrible. Is it my favorite? No, it is extremely long. And this isn't an album I listen to for fun. I wouldn't listen to this for much of anything, honestly. The track list on here is pretty hit or miss for me for the most part. Brandenburg Gate is actually one of the only songs on here, and it's actually all right in my opinion. It's not my favorite track, but it's there. The View, that's the only single off this album. I'm a chorus of the voices. You know what I mean? This song is all right. It's not as good as Brandenburg Gate, though, in my opinion. Metallica's really distorted guitars. That's another thing too. Not distorted, but the big guitar sound. They really try. I mean, the guitar sound on here is actually really good, I will say. At least when it comes to the electric guitars. The acoustic guitar sound, I think, leaves a little bit to be desired, but at least for my taste. But when it comes to the electric guitar, it actually sounds really good when it's used, when it's utilized, which it is a lot. But yeah, back to Brandenburg Gate, I forgot to mention, Brandenburg Gate has a chord progression in there that sort of is a recurring theme throughout this album. And I think musically that's what this album is trying to call back to almost. which is really interesting. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but you'll understand what I mean in a minute. So yeah, The View is, even though it's a single off this album, I was never a huge fan of it per se, but it's all right. Pumping Blood is one of those tracks that's really abstract. It's not for everybody. I'm not even a huge fan of it. It's one of those songs where Lou Reed sounds like a raving old man in the background. Maybe that's what it was meant to be. There is a lot of angst behind this. In fact, I got like weird Saint Anger vibes from this album. So I don't know. Mistress Dread, I think it Pumping Blood feeds into Mistress Dread, I should say. So they're kind of the same song to me almost. Again, maybe that was intentional. I'm not sure. And then Iced Honey, which is one of my favorite tracks off this album. It's the only other song on this album outside The View and Brandenburg Gate. And again, the chord progression on Iced Honey, it's pretty. I'm pretty sure it's the same as Brandenburg Gate, just with little rhythmic differences here and there. And it sounds like it's trying to call back to Brandenburg Gate. It's one of the lighter songs off this album, again, which is pretty interesting, I have to say. Again, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but that's one of the things musically that I noticed. But that's not the only time. We have more. Cheat on Me is another one of those abstract songs that not many people are going to appreciate. It's I don't know. James Hetfield's vocals on this, he sounds a little strained. I don't know if that was part of the direction. Again, I don't know what the concept behind this album is. I'm just making observations. But yeah, he sounds a little strained on here. But whatever. It's a pretty long song, I will say, but if you're following along with the lyrics, I guess it's not too long, but whatever. Frustration is another one of those songs that calls back to Brandenburg Gate. Only this time is a little different because Frustration, there's like a little section in there. This is what I like to call like a half song because musically there's structure, but vocally there isn't. Which is pretty odd. Adds for kind of a kind of structural dissonance, I guess you could say. And it's an interesting song to listen to. At least follow along with the lyrics as you listen to it, I think is probably the best way to listen to this song. But that chord progression comes back, again, from Iced Honey and from Brandenburg Gate. Only this time, it sounds like it's calling back, but there's a lot of chaos in the vocals, and it's just all over the place. It's very abstract and all that weird stuff. It's a pretty interesting track. It's one of those more abstract songs again, half songs, but I don't actually mind this one that much, although it's not a favorite. I'm not gonna go back to this album just for that song. That's for sure. Little Dog is one of the more really abstract songs on here, and it's whatever. I don't have much to say about it. There are some one-liners from there. There's that, but other than that, there's not much else that the song has to offer. It moves way too slow. I feel like they could have picked it up a little more, but whatever. Dragon is an interesting song. In fact, these last two songs are very interesting. Dragon is more like an ambient track that crescendos into something big and then decrescendos at the very, very end. And I actually like this track, believe it or not. It's not a song. It's more avant-garde, more abstract, all that fun stuff. But it seems to be that if when this album was sort of conceptualized, I think Lou Reed conceptualized it with Dragon and Junior Dad in mind already, and then he kind of filled things in as he went along from there. Because Dragon and Junior Dad, I'm just gonna group those two in together, are probably, like, with Iced Honey, my favorite tracks on this album. And I know that sounds crazy, Junior Dad especially is almost 20 minutes long, and half of it is pretty much just a droning of strings. So why do I like? Well, of course, I enjoy drone music, drone metal, ambient stuff. So again, it kind of caters to my taste a little bit. I can respect the sort of ambient stuff that Dragon and Junior Dad have to offer, but Junior Dad in particular is the last song on this album, but it calls back again. It calls back to that chord progression. I swear there's something behind there, and I noticed it even back when I first listened to the album, but I didn't think too much about it, not as much as I do now, but yeah, this is an interesting, very abstract album. Again, it isn't for everybody. In fact, it's probably for nobody. It's probably just for Lou Reed. I think if anybody were to enjoy anything off this album, it would be by sheer coincidence or accident. I really feel like Lou Reed just wanted to do this because he wanted to do it, and that was it. I really get that feeling. And Metallica went along because it was something different. Because Metallica's always been about doing different things, just for, doing different things. I mean, you just look at Load and Reload and you understand what I mean. This album gives off the vibe of a jam session. It sounds like it was all recorded within the same space with everybody there, and they were just, doing their thing right there, which is which gives off a pretty interesting vibe, although it doesn't have a kind of polish that you would maybe expect from an album that comes out, in the second decade of the 21st century, I should say. So, but, for what it is, I mean, I don't know. There are tracks off here I like. I'm not going to say that I enjoy the album front to back, because it is pretty abstract and pretty weird. The lyrics don't make a whole lot of sense, and there are parts where, some things don't make sense. There's drumming choices that Lars Ulrich makes in particular that I wholly disagree with, but I mean, that's just how it is, But there are tracks off here that I actually have a lot of respect for, that I actually do enjoy, that I have listened to a lot, especially Junior Dad and Iced Honey. But, I mean, again, I think this was an album that Lou Reed just wanted to make for himself. And he decided to sell it because it's something that he can sell. So, I don't know. It's an interesting album. It's not great. It's not even, I wouldn't even call it good. I would just say it's interesting. It's an interesting album. Abrasive at times. If that's artistic choice or not, we'll never know. But yeah, that's sort of just my take on it. Has it aged well in 6 years? Have I looked at it with a sort of acclaim that, I mean, I defended this album back in the day as being sort of, misunderstood and all that. People saying it was the worst album ever made, and I still disagree. I still believe Stomp 442 is way worse than this album. Yeah, that's right. Anthrax made a worse album than this, and I'm sticking to that. That album is horrible, and anyway, I need to calm down. But what am I doing here? Oh man, I lost my train of thought. See, that's what Anthrax does to you. You know what I mean? Anyway. Whew. Focus. Got it. Okay. Yeah, anyway, yeah, this is an interesting album. It's not the worst album ever made. I disagree with that. There are worse albums out there. Is it... I don't know. Is it something to listen to on your leisure time? No, probably not. It's like an art project, you know? It's not fine art. I don't know what it is. I don't think it knows what it is either. But it's interesting. It's an interesting thing. And, you know, I defended the album because back in the day, because I think back then the metal community was really, well, I don't know. There seems to be sometimes a little bit of groupthink involved in opinions on albums pertaining to Metallica for the most part. There are people who absolutely love what they do and people who absolutely hate everything they do. And I think a lot of those voices went over to the hate side just because some other people said they hated it as well. So, I mean, that's probably why I defended it, because I don't think it's horrible or the worst album ever or whatever. It's kind of it's just there. It's like the Battlefield Earth of albums, I think. It's just... You know it's there. You kind of don't understand why it needs to be there, but it's there. And it's got its kooky moments that are kind of entertaining. There are some moments in there that are, you know, pretty interesting that you might even like. There are moments in there where it's like, you know, I mean, it's way too long for its own good. It seems overly ambitious. Yeah. It's like the Battlefield Earth of albums, I think. That's all I really got to say about it. Let me know what you think, and yeah.